I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Wadandi and Pibblebin people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
The trick to the wine industry is, we do a lot of hard, horrible work, with the pruning and the harvest, and it's tiring and all that. But, you're watching those grapes develop, you're getting the grapes into the winery, you're making the wine, and then when you finally put them together for bottling, you go, wow, there it is. That's what we did it all for.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Picardy Wines has been producing world-class fine wines at their estate in Pemberton, Western Australia since 1996. But their story hails back much further than that, with William and Sandra Pannell, pioneers of the Margaret River region. Today, I'm honoured to be joined by Dan Pannell, who is going to tell me the story of Picardy. Hi, Dan. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, how are you going?
I have been watching, drinking, and a huge fan of your wines for a very long time. I'm really glad to have you on here. I know it is a busy time, so thank you so much for making a little bit of space in your day for me.
That's all right. It's got me out of 3 degrees and pruning.
Ouch, that sounds painful. I suppose you can't wear gloves in that kind of weather, can you? Do they just get in the way?
We use electric secateurs, so one hand has a glove on it for protection with steel fingers on it.
Goodness gracious. Now, Dan, I want to set the scene for your family history. So we do need to go a little bit of a ways back. Can you tell me a little bit about William and Sandra and their kind of start in the wine arena?
Dad's sort of an avid reader, and when he gets passionate about something, almost goes over the top. And during his university days while studying medicine, sort of got to know a fair bit about wine, and through his course got to know Jack Mann out at Hortons and became very interested in the wine and the grape production, and then started reading about it and got to learn that Margaret River was proclaimed as one of the good sites for Cabernet, and Tom Cullity had already started some things down there, and Dad got to know Tom, and through that, started Moss Wood.
And one of the founding estates of the Margaret River region. How long were they involved with Moss Wood for?
Started planting in 68. First vintage was 73, and then I think Dad sold it late 85 to Keith and Claire Mugford. We've still got it.
Yeah, it's always nice to know that it's gone from someone that really cares about the estate to another family that certainly has and continues on that legacy. What was your childhood like growing up?
Oh, running around in the dirt and swimming in the dams, and Mum and Dad were pretty much out there every spare minute. Dad wasn't working in town, and for extra money, we had nothing back then. Mum would do cuttings and other things around the vineyard, trying to sort of top things up a bit from there. So it was always, standing on tables even because we were so small, putting wine bottles into boxes, just helping where we could. I think that's the only reason Mum and Dad had kids, was to help around the vineyard.
Small hands make light work, I suppose they say.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when it comes to helping out, for the most part, we like doing that for our parents because they're grateful. But, it gets in the way of having a good time, like you said, out in the dams. Did you immediately think, oh, this wine stuff's interesting, or did you hate it?
Oh, I certainly hated the medicine when he was doing that. The wines, I always enjoyed it, but I never saw it as something I was going to do, no.
So what did you do when you kind of left school? Where did you go, and what did you want to do, and where did you imagine you would be?
Oh, I actually went to do accounting, finance management, but did a lot of surfing and windsurfing during that period and didn't pass that one, but got a couple of years, which has been very handy in running the business here. And then went off and ran pubs and bottle shops for about 5 years and got bored with that, and then decided to go to Roseworthy and see how it goes. So, I was in the last crew through the original Roseworthy, which was fantastic.
I have never heard a bad word or any boring stories about Roseworthy. Your brother also studied. Did he study wine before you or after you?
Yeah, he was 2 or 3 years before me at Roseworthy as well. Yeah, Roseworthy, it was a fantastic course in that it was more like a TAFE course in that, they actually taught you things you needed to know. You just didn't do general sciences and general, everything else. It was really wine and vineyard specific. And, it was just fantastic way of learning, I thought.
Well, practical knowledge is so important, and it does seem to be that Roseworthy got you out into the field, and like you said, they gave you a lot of kind of common sense and practical hands-on experience. When did you know that that's what you wanted to do? Was there a moment that you remember where you thought, yep, this is for me, or was it a slow burn?
Well, while I'd been running bottle shops, I sort of thought, I think I'd rather go back into the production side. Bottle shop, same place, all day, every day isn't really my thing. I like to swap and change my roles a lot during the day. I get a bit bored otherwise. So, that's one thing about this industry. You're constantly on the move, doing different things, different places, travel, even within my role at the winery. I'm in the office, in the vineyard, in the winery every day sort of thing. So.
Now, I know that one of your first postings was at Rosebrook, is that right?
Yeah, Rosebrook Estate.
And what did you learn there? What did you go in? What was the role that you had when you went in there, and what did it teach you?
Because of my management background, even though I was only a new winemaker, they put me in there to manage the property of the business, the vineyard and the winery, which was just fantastic. I got to make mistakes with someone else's money before I came to Picardy. And I had Keith Mugford consulting and Ian Bell, because they were both at Mosswood. They were consulting over the top of me. So, and then Dad's availability as well, just learnt so much. And then through their contacts, there's John Kozovich and John Durham and David Gregg and all these sort of old school guys. Hopefully they don't mind me saying that and Pat Carmody at Craig Lee, that just open sources of knowledge that was open to me. It was just fantastic.
I'm going to ask you a question. I don't know if it's the right question to ask, but what's it like growing up when a lot of people know your parents? Is it kind of annoying in the fact that there's high expectations for yourself? Did you want to be a bit, a bit miscellaneous and not kind of be known as much, or was it a source of pride for you?
I was probably more the wanting to just do my own thing. I was a very individual kid anyway. That's why I didn't play team sports. I was surfing and windsurfing and, more stuff on my own. And you'd say now I had a fair slapping of ADHD. And so Mum and Dad would have people over, and by 7 o'clock I'd worn myself out. So I used to tell them to go home and leave us alone because I was going to bed. It was about the age of 7 or 8.
I love that. And you know what? I'm sure they'd had a few wines, and by that stage they were just talking nonsense anyway. So it was probably the right time to call it.
I think it was a different industry back then. So you wouldn't say it was fame or glory or, any of this self-proclaimed rock star status that the wine industry seems to put on itself nowadays. It was pretty basic back then. There was only 4 or 5 wineries, and there'd be people visiting all the time, but it was more a friendship basis and a sort of rock star basis, if you know what I mean.
I know that Burgundy is a real source of inspiration and a love for your parents. Did you ever go and do a vintage in Burgundy prior to Picardy?
No, I've never had time to do a vintage. I've been there during vintage and, had many visits there, but never had time to do a vintage as such. But yeah, I just love the place. That every time, well, even going back to the first time I went there, you go into a cellar for the first time and, tears in my eyes. It was just so inspiring, and still is. It's not just the vines, it's the people, it's the architecture, it's just everything there. I just love it. So, yeah.
It's the dedication, isn't it? It's not a hobby to them. It's such dedication. And so the money that's thrown into it and everything that's, it's immaculate, and it's just it's such a passion. And it's not unusual, you know. It's not that guy down the road that's got everyone lives and breathes it. So I know what you mean by that. You're in awe when you walk into Burgundy, into a cellar. You just think, whoa, look at this.
Yeah, I think though it's changing now. It's changed over the last 10, 15 years. That before it was just pure passion. There was no bugger all money in it, being honest, for the Burgundians. You know, they were small, hard-working type vineyards. The costs would have been exponential if they weren't doing it themselves. And it wasn't really a business. It was just a lifestyle and a passion. But I think now there's a lot of money in Burgundy and it's becoming a business as well, you know, a bit more like Bordeaux already is. I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn there, but that's how I see it.
There's certainly been some big changes. I agree with you. So just for the listeners, tell me a little bit. So, you know, they decided to sell Mosswood. Your parents decided to sell Mosswood. They fell in love with Burgundy. They obviously fell in love with Pinot Noir. Tell me a little bit about the move to Pemberton and kind of when that happened.
Originally, Dad and Mum bought shares in Domaine de la Pustor with a few other Australians, and that sort of opened a lot of doors. He'd met Becky Wasserman before that period, and she's just an inspirational human being, and her husband Russell. They just taught Mum and Dad so much about Burgundy, and then through Becky, bought the shares in Domaine de la Pustor, and Gerard Potel just taught Dad so much about Pinot production and clones and all that. And then through that, got to know Carl Verhus, who was the winemaker at the University of Dijon, doing all the clonal trials. So just got to learn so much about the Pinot and Chardonnay clones as well, which subsequently we've got a lot of those here. And, I think making a huge difference to what we do. But, that was more a whim that never really did much financially for them. Then that led to the group involved in that set up Smithbrook with Dad as the managing director. And, the partnership there wasn't that great, so Dad and Mum decided to do Picardy on their own. And I was studying at Roseworthy already by then and said, I'll come over when it's ready. And it's turned into this.
Wow. I mean, you could have so easily decided to go and do a vintage somewhere else or some more experience at a different winery, but I'm so glad that you had the foresight to get involved with what your parents were doing at Picardy. I do want to talk a bit about clonal selection, just because it's a big part of kind of the foresight of your father and mother, and I think it plays a big part in why your wines are so amazing now. So you did have a couple of different clones while you had at Mosswood, didn't you, of Pinot, D2 V4 and D5 V12, is that right?
Yeah, they're now saying that what we call droopy here is probably the Pommard clone, the latest research is saying. So, we call them droopy and upright, but they're saying it's probably the Pommard clone now, which is good. It's very strawberry. Depends where you pick it, sour strawberry through to bruised strawberry if you let it go too far. And then upright's very rustic and complex and dirty and earthy, and I call it sort of the dairy clone. It's got a lot of everything like a dairy can have. I'll leave the following descriptors to the people's imagination.
Yeah. And your father brought over some clones, 114, 115 and 777 of Pinot. And I believe he did that all in the legal terms, which blows my mind because that's certainly not how a lot of Australia has kind of gathered their clones over time.
Yeah, and it's really difficult. 2 to 3 years quarantining was very expensive, but we were lucky at the time. The guy running the quarantine station was really helpful, and Dad had put in one vine and get out 20 cuttings, and Dad's always got a glass roof in it in Perth, and he had thousands of pot plants with little 2-twig cuttings planted in them, and expanded it fairly quickly. He also bought in from Yalumba because they had the 4 Chardonnay selection clones as well, 76, 95, 96 and 277. But once again, still 2 to 3 years of quarantined to bring them into Western Australia. So, and then we've brought another 6 clones of Pinot in since then. So, yeah, it's been full on.
Yeah, certainly. So much time and patience, but definitely worthwhile when we see the fruits of your labour. Tell me a little bit about kind of working with Cabernet and Chardonnay in Margaret River and then starting Picardy with Pinot. Did you have a lot of challenges in terms of the reception of people in the area growing something a little bit different?
Yeah, well, this area was always potatoes and apples and cauliflower, broccoli. So growing grapes for a start was a change. But, yeah, I think the way we grow grapes, Dad and I, it probably suits Pinot better than Cabernet anyway. We try and keep things sort of low cropped and low vigour. And Pinot seems to like that. So I think naturally we're more Pinot growers than Cabernet growers as such. Chardonnay just does Chardonnay things. The biggest problem is trying to get a yield on it, I suppose.
In terms of Pemberton, when you first started out there, how many wineries were operating there?
I think there was about 6 or 7, but all fairly new and all learning the way. And, I've been here 27 years now, still learning from the vines and the vineyard. So it's still a very young area. Even at 25, 30 years, it's most of the vineyards are only that old. A lot of the growers are more commercial growers. So, it's an area where the soils are quite rich and it's easy to get vigors and yields if you want to. The hardest thing, I think, especially with Pinot, is getting small berries. So we've worked on that over the years, learning how to stress the vines a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, I've never been down to Pemberton, shame on me. Are you a 4-hour drive from Margs? How far is it to get to you?
We're about 3.5 hours from Perth, about 2 hours from Margaret River. And so even though we are further south than Margaret River, but we've also got altitude of about 300 feet. And 300 metres, so we're about the same as Burgundy, and we're on a ridge that is sort of the crossover between continental and maritime, so we generally get the cooling effects of both. The average summer here, we'd have 5 evenings a year, you'd sit outside in a T-shirt. In saying that, this one was a bit different, but I loved it. It was good to have a summer, so yeah, it was fantastic.
I feel that Picardy has stayed true to their vision for wines, even though, you've adopted different clones and kind of had trials with those. I feel like for me personally, when I've seen the wines, they've always stayed true, I believe, to a style and to kind of their origins. Do you agree with that, or do you think that the wines have changed significantly over time?
I think they've grown. I think the style's probably the same. One thing, going back a step, when Dad and Mum sold Mosswood, they bought a lot of 82 and 83 Bordeaux and Burgundy. So I grew up drinking those wines, and I think it's influenced my palate to a certain style. There were some pretty great wines in there by some great producers, and I think Dad and I like the same style of Burgundy, and different ways of going about it to get to that end point sometimes, but generally we do like the same style, and I think that we've kept that style but grown on it with the new clones, oak usage, winery techniques, vineyard management techniques. So I think the wines, especially from 18 onwards, where we got the new clones into the mix, have grown but still of the same sort of complex, silky elegance that we look for.
Definitely. I mean, they're wines where they can't be from anywhere else, I find. I couldn't say this looks a little bit like this area or somewhere in the East Coast. I really feel like they can only be Picardy wines from Pemberton, and they do have a finesse and a ethereal elegance that is just It almost does feel Burgundian, but I don't want to say that either because I don't think you necessarily are trying to emulate that. But they do have this otherworldly feel that is so beautiful, and I can lose myself in the aromas. They're just stunning.
Yeah, I think, sure, if I could make I don't know, Grand Chazot, Clos de Vougeot, that's what I'd be aiming to do. For me, maybe a Bon Mar or Amoureuse, but, it is Pemberton, it is Australia, it is different soils. In saying that, though, there are some similar soils in Louis St. George, more of the red rock gravel style soils rather than the limestone soils. But, yeah, we certainly don't have any limestone in our area. So, it is going to be a different wine, but taking our knowledge from Burgundy and the producers there, but using Australian grapes. There's going to be similarities, but also differences.
In terms of how many hectares you have and how much what's your production that you're making?
We've got 10 hectares, doing sort of 60 to 70 tonnes of grapes per year. Yeah, different years, different things.
Okay, yeah. Where are you're mostly selling in WA? I mean, I know that I said yes to any of your wines if they came my way. They were always on my list in Sydney, but where is your biggest kind of consumers?
You've certainly got a good mailing list, and then Western Australia does very well for us, and over East it's always been consistent. We used to export a lot, but just down to about 3 countries now. It's difficult without a lot of income, being honest, exporting as a small producer. The red tape's hard work. So, yeah, sort of backing out of that a bit. Japan's been fantastic in saying that. It's been consistent for a long time, very knowledgeable market. It's been fantastic for us, so we'll stay there for sure.
I can actually, that makes sense to me, and I do think someone sent me a photo of a very small, tiny Japanese store with your wines in it. And they were like, look what I found over here. But that makes sense for me. I think that market for you as well, that people that understand kind of the artisan kind of product. Tell me a little bit about Manjimup being so close and, has that helped tourism in the region? Do people travel down to get truffles and then pop by and drink Pinot at the same time?
I think so. I mean, the truffles and avocados have been huge for this area. The farmers did well with potatoes and apples, but the truffles and avocados have changed agriculture down here. This also brought the food scene, which has helped. We don't have a cellar door because it's just not busy enough as an area to do so. But Pemberton is probably more the tourist town than Manjimup, but Manjimup's picking up because of the truffles. Pemberton's a quaint sort of old milling town with beautiful little houses, and people really come down here for the winter to sit in front of a fire and read a good book, whereas Manjimup's more an industrial town. So it's not quite as quaint, you'd say.
Well, I would travel very far to get some of your wines, and in saying that, truffles as well. Is there any surf down there? Do you still surf, or is that something that you...
No. Gave up when I left Margaret River. In saying that, I've got a boat with a friend in Busselton, so I still go out fishing a lot and, boating in general a lot, and, still love it on the ocean whenever I can. I'd love to get back into the surfing one day. I just don't have time from here, though.
No, I can imagine that you're pretty busy most of the year. In terms of getting, people to help and having people come for vintage, are you hiring people from overseas in Burgundy for vintage, or have you got kind of a select crew that you use each year?
A few things. Generally we use backpackers. They're generally French or Italian. But we have had Guillaume Tardy from Domaine Jean Tardy worked here for a year. Oran Galleron worked here from Domaine Jerome Galleron. She was here 3 years, actually. So we've had a few different crew here help us over the years. And then during COVID, it really changed things. And we put out to a group of friends who were caravanners, and they invited all their friends, and it's now become a thing. We put on huge lunches for them and set up our area above our dam, in a little bit of a forest we've got, as a caravan park, and they all help us pick the grapes, and becomes a bit of a festival. Actually, it's fantastic. It's I don't know, it's become a story in itself. It's just these people came out of the woodwork to help when we thought we were going to lose everything. If you can't pick a year, you don't get to sell wine for a year, and it would have made things very difficult, but these people came and saved us, and just so much gratitude for that too. And now we continue it on, just simply because it's made vintage wonderful rather than just hard work.
That's so nice to hear. I often think, I can imagine, if I put my hat on from a winery's point of view, having people that kind of coming down and they're picking, but they're not really picking at the rate that perhaps you would want them to. And then, they need their long breaks and their cups of tea. It could be quite painful. But for the people doing it, it would mean the world to them. And I imagine they stay loyal for life, and you would have some really good memories around it. So I always think it's probably worthwhile doing it, whether it's with, your kind of members or your friends and family. I think that as a moment in time, that would be unforgettable for a lot of people.
Yeah, I was shocked, having picked grapes since I was a little child and still hate picking grapes. These people, it's on my bucket list. I've been wanting to do it forever. I'm going, are you crazy? But, I've made some lifelong friends out of it as well. Just met some amazing people who have come to help. And, it's a really beautiful thing. It's a story on its own. So, yeah.
So the question is, Dan, at the time that you're willing to go to bed, do you kick them out or do you let them party on?
We've built this beautiful new building, cellar door, tasting room thing where I just leave them there and I go home. Quite often, they have big lunches and we just have to go back to the winery anyway, and they go to sleep after a big lunch. People go, oh, you're saving so much money. And I'll tell you now, for the amount they eat and drink, we're not saving anything.
See, now that I can completely understand. But I'm glad you stayed true to yourself and just toddle off to bed when you're good and ready.
No, it's good fun to see it all happening around us as well, though, while we're still busy. So, it's good.
What do you see, Dan, for the future of Pemberton? If you were to kind of project for the next 5 to 10 years, what can you see happening in the region?
Once again, you've almost got to go backwards. I mean, the area was going very well. Then, the great pullout happened, and we, per vine capita, I would be shocked if we weren't the highest pulled vine rate in the country. We've lost some massive vineyards around the area. And now it's sort of regrowing, but very slowly. I think over time we will become known for Pinot and Chardonnay, but we're still fairly young on the ground. I think if some of the producers here were based in the Yarra, they'd already be killing the pig, because I do think there's some fantastic wines like the Lillian from John Broxott and Batista from Bob Peruch, some very good wines. They're just in a unknown area on the wrong side of the country as such.
A sad fact. In terms of, I want to talk about the Merlot wine that you make. What's the approach? You've got Merlot, Cabernet and Cab Franc there. This was always a surprise wine to me. It's just a wine I could drink every day, and I probably don't say that about those blended wines perhaps as much, but what's your approach in that wine?
Dad, when first setting up Picardy, said, it's not going to ripen Cabernet well, and it doesn't. But, should ripen Merlot, and then Cab Franc's between the two. And so went more for the Saint-Emilion, Pomerol, the cooler areas of Bordeaux. And, we do cooler ferments on the Merlot, trying to retain the fruit, but not extract too much tannin. And then we make a base model of that called the Merlot Cabernet, which is just 12 months in oak, and then the Merlimont we put back to just old oak for an extra 10 months just to soften it and round it off and make it more approachable, but without adding more oak flavour as such. It can be a difficult wine to make in the area. Trying to ripen it every year is pretty line ball for us here.
Yeah. Yeah, being slightly cooler, I can see that. But the wines that do go into bottle are really kind of beautifully fruited and again, I'm going to use the same word again, but they are just really elegant, and I'm always so pleasantly surprised when I try that wine.
I think we've got a thing where, the best wines in the world almost taste good straight out of the press. There's a lot of belief that you need too much oak or too much acid or too much tannin to make a wine age, but the best wines I've ever had drink well straight out of the press, and then 20, 30, 40, 50 years later as well. I'm not saying ours will do those time frames, but great wines to me are that. A wine that has too much tannin in its youth to me still has too much tannin 20 years later, and the fruit's just dropping away, that's all. But that's my belief. Other people feel differently.
I recently got to try some of your new releases, which I feel very fortunate, and I drink far too much Pinot Noir, if that's even a thing. And I had your Pinot Noirs over a week, and I just feel that they are wines to be savoured. And I don't often think that. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I've taken this one wine and I've drunk it over 4 or 5 nights, and it gets better and better each time I look at it. And that is just such a joy to go on the journey with the wine.
Yeah, I think, back in my days in retail, there were a few Pinots made in Australia, but very few. And they were renowned for not aging well. I think one of those days are gone for most producers in Australia. Our O2 is still drinking fantastically. Yeah, it's got age and everything on it. But, that wine was one of the better wines we made, but it's nothing on what we're making now. With the natural vine age, you get so much more natural complexity and texture and depth in the wine, plus the new clones, plus a few winemaking techniques and better oak handling and things that have happened over the years. I think these wines will easily do the 20 plus years compared to what our older wines did. And I think there's a lot of good Pinot in Australia that is capable of that sort of thing now.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Dan, what do you love most about your job? If you were to kind of sum it up in a day or a moment, what keeps you doing what you do?
I think the trick to the wine industry is, we do a lot of hard, horrible work, with the pruning and the harvest, and it's tiring and all that. But, you're watching those grapes develop, you're getting the grapes into the winery, you're making the wine, and then when you finally put them together for bottling, you go, wow, there it is. That's what we did it all for. And, opening wines with friends further on, it's just lovely. But just to make the tête de cuvée and no business, no finance, no banking, and enjoy this wine with your mates while fishing. Some people that'd be golfing or playing tennis or whatever. It's be the epitome of making wine, I think. That's my feeling anyway.
I love that. It makes me want to I feel like, I wish I won the lottery and I could just give that to you and say, you know what, just make the tête de cuvée. Please send me a 12-pack, and take the money and go. I mean, if only. It's a lovely thought.
Imagine if you could have 5 rows of Bon Mar and just make that little bit and drink it yourself. Oh, life would be sweet, wouldn't it?
It would. It's a pipe dream, but it's a good one. Dan, I'd love to know, if you could only drink 3 boozy beverages for the rest of your life, what would they be and why?
It's probably broader than 3, but it narrows it down to 3 sort of. Would be the O2 Domaine René Angel, probably Clos de Vougeot, but any of the O2s from Philippe were just magnificent wines. They were the wine of my life, from the base level Von Romani through to the Grand Crus. They were just awesome. But for me, the favourite was the Clos de Vougeot. And then probably the O2 Denis Mortaise or Râpé Corton Charlemagne. I just love those wines. And then the last one would be passion fruit mojitos on a beach in Koh Samui.
Whoa, we took a turn there.
Got to say what you enjoy.
Absolutely. That is a whole different level of beverage enjoyment, and I absolutely love that from you. You've made my day with that comment. That's great. I'll definitely join you with the Denis Mortaise. The structure of those wines are absolutely outrageous. I think they're three excellent choices. I think you would be in good company with those. Dan, I've loved having you on. I love what you do. Keep doing it for as long as you can, because you've got some major fans out there. And I really hope one day I can get over and have a visit and see some of the spaces that you're talking about.
No, thank you for that, and feel welcome anytime. Love to show you around.
Love it. Thank you so much, Dan, and cheers to you.
Thank you. Bye.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.